He expected her to fall apart. That was the cruelest part. He stood there in the dying candlelight and told her she had been traded for a crown. And some small, ugly part of him waited for the tears, for the pleading, for the proof that he still owned her. She gave him none of it. She paused at the door. She turned, and she smiled. Not the warm smile he knew. This one was cold, smooth as the surface of a frozen lake. The kind of smile a person wears when they have already won a war the other side does not yet know they are fighting. By morning, the bed was empty. The crown was left behind. And every account that held his kingdom upright was gone. He thought he had broken her. He had no idea what he had just set free. The candles had burned low by the time he said it. Selene Hart stood near the tall windows of the chamber, her back straight, her hands folded, the firelight catching the silver threads in her dark hair. She was a woman well into the deep middle of her life, and she wore the years the way the mountains wore snow, with a calm that had been earned and could not be faked. She had heard him cross the room. She had felt the heat of him long before he spoke. After so many years, a body learns the weight of another body in a room, the way the air shifts when he steps close. I am taking Cora as my chosen mate. The words landed soft, almost gentle, as if gentleness could make them weigh less. It is for the stability of the pack, Selene. She did not turn right away. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and that scent drifted in. Resin and cold stone and something green underneath. Her scent had always lived in that same family. Vanilla and crushed pine. He used to say he could find her anywhere by it. He used to bury his face in her hair and breathe like a man coming up from deep water. He was not breathing her in now. Selene let the silence stretch. She let it grow heavy enough for him to feel it. Damon Raid waited, and this was the part he had rehearsed in his own mind, though he would never have admitted it. He had braced for the tears. He had braced for the way her voice would crack, for the pleading, for the small, desperate hands gripping his shirt. He had told himself he would be strong through it. He had told himself a king carries the burden of breaking hearts so the pack can survive. He wanted the tears. Some shameful part of him needed them, because tears would mean she still belonged to him. Tears would mean he still held the power in the room. Selene turned, and she smiled. It was not the smile he knew, not the warm one from quiet mornings, not the tired one after a long council. This smile was cool and perfect and final, smooth as the surface of a frozen lake, and it stopped the breath in his chest. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," she said. Her voice was glass, polished, unbroken. "May she bring you all the stability you deserve." Then she walked past him. She did not rush. She did not look back. The hem of her gown whispered against the floor, and the door opened, and the door closed, and the latch clicked into place with the smallest sound in the world. Damon stood alone in the candlelight, and for reasons he could not name, his hands had gone cold. He told himself it was relief. He was lying. The morning came pale and slow. Light bled through the heavy curtains and lay in long, bruised stripes across the floorboards. Damon woke the way he always woke beside her, reaching out before his mind was fully awake, reaching for the warmth, for the soft weight, for the slow rhythm of her breathing. His fingers closed on cold linen. He sat up. The headboard creaked behind him in a silence so deep it pressed against his ears. The chamber felt enormous, hollowed out. The kind of empty that has a sound of its own. He turned his head toward her side of the bed, smooth, untouched, already cold, and her scent, that scent he had carried in his chest for years, was thin now, fading, a ghost of vanilla and pine slipping out through the seams of the room, leaving nothing behind but cedar and dust. "Selene," he said. The word fell into the quiet and died there. He rose. The marble met his bare feet like a slap of winter. He crossed to her dressing room, and the great wardrobe stood open, and the wardrobe was bare. Every gown gone, every coat, the vanity wiped clean, no brush, no ribbon, no trace of the woman who had lived inside these walls beside him. Only two things remained. In the center of the glass table sat the Luna crown, heavy, cold, the diamonds throwing tiny shards of morning light across the ceiling. She had set it down with care, dead center, perfect. And beneath it, one black envelope. His heart did something strange then. It stumbled. Far from the chamber, in a vehicle moving steadily north through the gray dawn, Selene Hart watched the trees blur past the window. She did not feel triumphant. Not yet. That would come later, in its own time, in its own cold and quiet way. For now there was only the hum of the road and the steady presence of the woman beside her. "He will have found it by now," said Marin Frost. The captain sat with her gloved hands loose in her lap, her eyes forward, her voice low. She had taken off the royal colors. She wore dark gear now, lean and practical, and she looked more dangerous for it. The crown, the note. "Let him find it," Selene said. Her voice held no heat. That was the thing people never understood about her. The deepest things she felt in stillness. She did not slam doors. She did not raise her voice. When something cut her to the bone, she went quiet. And she went to work. She thought of all the years, the long nights at the ledgers, the trade routes she had built thread by thread, while the council praised his strength and his jaw and his voice, the way the elders would nod past her in the hall as if she were a clever piece of furniture, the way they called her the one who handles the paperwork, smiling, never once understanding that the paperwork was the spine that held the entire kingdom upright. She thought of the way Damon had looked at her in the early years, as if she were the only warmth in a cold world. And she thought of the way he had looked at her last night, as if she were a problem he had finally solved. Something in her had gone very calm in that moment, calmer than grief, calmer than rage, a clarity so clean it almost felt like peace, because a woman who is seen only as a tool is a woman no one thinks to watch. "You are quiet," Marin said. Selene let a small breath leave her, not a sigh, just a release. "I am listening," she said, "to how quiet it is when no one is asking me to fix anything." Back in the chamber, Damon broke the wax seal. His hands were not steady. He noticed that, and it disturbed him. He was a man who had walked into 100 fights without a tremor, and now a single sheet of paper made his fingers clumsy. Inside lay heavy cardstock, a few words in her clean, even hand. "A throne lasts only as long as the board allows it. Your move." He read it twice, then a third time, and the meaning would not settle, because the meaning made no sense in the world as he understood it. She was the gentle one, the patient one, the one who soothed and balanced and smoothed the rough edges of his rule. A sharp knock struck the door. Wesley Cole stepped in, his face the color of ash, a tablet gripped white in his hand. He did not look at the bed. He did not have to. "Your Majesty," he said, and then the title seemed to fail him, and he simply said, "Damon." "She is gone, Wesley." Damon dragged a hand down his face, hunting for the old authority and finding the well dry. "It is for the best. With Cora at my side, the southern factions fall in line. Selene will understand in time. She always understands." "You do not understand," Wesley said. His voice cracked on the last word. She did not just leave. And in the long, pale silence that followed, with her scent fading from the walls and her crown abandoned on the glass, and that one cold line of ink burning a hole in his hand, Damon Reed felt the first true thread of fear move through his chest. He had wanted her tears. He was beginning to suspect. He had been the only one in the room who had anything left to lose. The first sign was the silence in the counting rooms. By mid-morning, the word had spread through the keep like cold water finding cracks in stone. The vaults would not open. The great ledgers that should have shown a kingdom heavy with grain and gold showed columns of nothing. Numbers that had stood for years were simply absent now, as though a hand had reached in during the night and wiped the slate clean, leaving the clerks staring at pages that no longer made sense. Damon Reed stood at the head of the long obsidian table and watched his council come apart. "The accounts are frozen," said one of the elders, his voice climbing higher with every word. "The trade routes answer to names none of us recognize. The northern shipments have not arrived. They were redirected before dawn." "Redirected where?" Damon asked. No one could tell him. He felt the room turning, not toward him, around him, the way river water circles a stone it has stopped needing, finding its path without ever asking the stone's permission. For years these men had bent beneath the weight of his presence. His aura had filled a chamber the way stormlight fills a valley, heavy and humming, and they had lowered their eyes and softened their voices and waited for him to decide their fates. Now they spoke over him. Now their gazes slid past his face to the empty chair at his right hand, the chair where a Luna should have sat, and found it bare. "Where is she?" someone murmured near the far end of the table. It was not a question meant for him. It was closer to a prayer they did not know they were saying out loud, because every man in that room understood, somewhere beneath his pride, the thing Damon was only beginning to understand himself. The kingdom had never run on his strength. It had run on her hands, on the quiet woman who had balanced the impossible every single night, while they praised the breadth of his shoulders and the depth of his voice. The collapse did not stay behind the walls for long. By the second day, it had spilled into the lower wards. The market squares, once loud with trade and the smell of bread and wood smoke, had gone thin and anxious. Stalls stood half empty. Grain that should have flowed in from the north never came, and the price of what remained climbed hour by hour until the poorest families stopped buying altogether and simply stood in doorways, watching, counting what little they had left. A pack can forgive a king many things. It cannot forgive an empty pot. Damon walked the upper gallery that evening and looked down at the cold squares, and for the first time in his life, he heard something he had never heard directed at him. Not cheering, not even fear, doubt. It moved through the crowd below like a low wind, and it found the cracks in him too. Far to the north, the hands that had built all of it were busy with something new. Selene Hart stood at a wall of glass that rose from floor to ceiling, looking down over a sprawl of stone and steel and slow-rising smoke. The air at this height was thinner, sharper, edged with iron and snow. There was nothing soft in it, nothing green, and she found, to her own quiet surprise, that she liked the honesty of that. She wore charcoal, cut clean and severe, her dark hair drawn back from her face. A cup of black coffee warmed her palms. She did not so much drink it as hold it, feeling the heat travel into her fingers, grounding her in the body that had carried her all this way without once breaking stride. Behind her, a door slid open without a sound. "The transfer is complete," Maren Frost said. The captain crossed the room the way she crossed every room now, as though the air itself had learned to step aside for her. She had set aside the royal colors. She wore dark practical gear instead, lean and unadorned, and she looked the more dangerous for it. All of it, quietly, cleanly. By the time anyone in the South thinks to count, there will be nothing left to count. "And the council?" Selene asked. Confused. A thin smile touched the captain's mouth. Frightened. Very loud. Selene let out a slow breath against the glass and watched it bloom and fade. "Let them be loud," she said. "Loud men rarely think to look behind themselves." The far door opened again, and this time the room itself seemed to change shape. Kane Drummond filled the doorway the way weather fills a sky. He was an enormous man, broad through the chest and shoulders, his presence a low rumble that arrived before he ever spoke a word. Alpha of the hard iron country to the north. The kind of man other men crossed wide rooms to avoid. And yet here, in this place, he stopped several steps short of the woman at the window, and he waited for her to turn to him. That single detail would have told anyone watching everything they needed to know about who held the power in the room. "Hart," he said, pouring himself a measure from the decanter on her desk. He did it without asking. It was the only liberty he allowed himself. "When you first reached out, all those quiet months ago, I took you for a wounded mate looking to borrow a sword. And now?" Selene turned, unhurried. "Now I think the wounded part was a costume." He studied her over the rim of his glass. "You did not come north to be rescued. You came north to lift the whole board off his table and set it down on mine, where no one would ever think to look for it." "He was a fine leader," Selene said. "Charismatic. The pack loved the sound of him filling a room." She set down her coffee with the smallest click of porcelain on stone. But a charismatic leader and a capable one are rarely the same man. He believed loyalty was something a body was owed by blood. He believed a bond was a kind of leash. He never once understood that the thing holding his kingdom upright was not his name on a banner. "It was you," Kane said. "It was arithmetic," she answered. "Done patiently, for years, by someone he had stopped bothering to look at." Kane laughed at that, low and real, and lifted his glass an inch in something close to respect. He was not a man who gave respect cheaply, and they both knew it. He will come for you, he said. Once he cannot feed his people or pay his soldiers, he will ride north looking for a war. Let him come, Selene said. He will not find a battlefield. He will find a closed door and an empty vault, and the slow understanding that the war was over before he knew it had begun. But when Cain had gone, and the room had settled back into its hush, Selene stood alone at the glass and felt the cold of it seep through her, and the thing she had held at bay all day finally came for her in the quiet. The bond. It lived under the breastbone, that old tether, dormant now and starved but stubbornly alive. And in the stillness, it stirred, the way a coal stirs beneath ash when the wind shifts above it. A dull, warm, traitorous ache that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with a man far to the south who did not yet understand how completely he had lost her. She closed her eyes, and against every wish she had, the memory rose up to meet her. It had been an ordinary night, near the beginning of everything. That was the part that undid her, even now. Nothing grand about it. No ceremony, no audience, no crown. Only rain on the windows and a low fire, and the two of them sprawled on the floor before it. Maps and ledgers spread everywhere, planning a future that neither of them yet knew how to spell. She had been arguing some stubborn point about the eastern routes. She could still feel the heat that had been in her own voice, and she remembered the way he had gone slowly quiet, watching her until she stopped mid-sentence and said, "What?" Damon had reached out then, slowly, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers had been warm, rough at the tips, calloused from the blade. They had traced the line of her jaw as though he were learning it by heart, as though her face were the single most important map in a room full of them, and the whole sharp argument had simply melted off her tongue. "Say it again," he had murmured. "Say what?" "Anything. I only want to hear your voice." His thumb had brushed the corner of her mouth, light as breath. "I think I could listen to you reason out loud for the rest of my life, and never grow tired of it." The scent of him had been everywhere in that moment. Cedar and storm and warm skin. The particular smell that her body had learned to read as home before her mind ever agreed to the word. She had leaned into his hand without deciding to, the way a plant leans toward light, and the maps had slid forgotten across the floorboards. He had kissed her slowly that night, not the way a king claims a Luna, the way a man touches something he cannot quite believe belongs to him. His hands had moved over her with a kind of reverence that made her ache low and deep, learning the slope of her shoulders, the curve of her spine, pausing at every small sound she made as if he meant to commit each one to memory. There had been no hurry in him, none at all. That was the thing she had loved most, in the end. The patience of him. The way he had looked at her in the firelight as though there were nothing in all the world he would rather do than discover her slowly, hour by hour, breath by breath, until the rain stopped and the fire burned to embers, and still he had not let her go. She had fallen asleep with her cheek against his chest that night, his heartbeat steady in her ear, his fingers moving in slow, lazy circles against the small of her back, and she had thought, with a certainty that frightened her even then, "This is what safe feels like." Selene opened her eyes. The northern city lay gray and indifferent far below. The coffee had gone cold in its cup, and the ache beneath her breastbone had sharpened now into something with edges, something that wanted to be grief and would not be allowed to. She pressed her palm flat to the glass once and let the cold answer the heat. Loving him had never been the mistake. She made herself hold that thought without flinching. Her mistake had been believing that the man who learned her jaw by firelight and the man who would later look at her across a cold council chamber and see only a worn tool were the same person worth the same trust. She would not make that mistake a second time. 300 miles to the south, the bond found him too. Damon came awake that night with his own hand pressed flat to his chest, to the exact spot beneath the breastbone where the tether had lived for years, and the spot burned, not with warmth this time, with absence, with the particular pain of a thing being pulled steadily, deliberately away from him, somewhere he could not follow. He sat up in the cold, wide bed and breathed through it. He had spent the whole day performing, pretending the panic in the council was a passing storm he would weather, pretending the stranger now seated at his right hand was anything but a stranger wearing a crown that did not fit her, pretending he could not feel the kingdom thinning out beneath him like ice stretched over very deep and very dark water. Now, alone in the dark, there was no one left to perform for. And the memory came for him too. The same fire, the same rain. Her voice rising in stubborn argument and then going soft and startled the instant he touched her face. The warm weight of her against his chest as she slept. The way her breathing had slowed to match his own without either of them ever choosing it. He had lain awake long after she slept that night, just feeling the rhythm of her, quietly terrified by how much he wanted to keep it forever. That was a truth he had buried so deep, he had very nearly convinced himself it was gone. He did not let himself name it now. He was not ready. He simply lay in the dark and felt the size of the absence where she had been. He pressed harder against his chest, as if he could shove the ache back down where it had come from. "Selene," he said into the dark. And the dark, of course, gave him nothing back. Far to the north, Selene Hart finally slept. She did not dream of revenge. The people who imagined her would have been surprised by that. They pictured her sharpening knives in the dark, feeding on the thought of his ruin. The truth was quieter and far more dangerous than that. She dreamed of firelight, of a younger man with warm, rough hands and a patient mouth, who had once made her believe she was the most important thing in any room he entered. And when she woke before dawn with the dream still clinging to her like the last trace of his scent, she allowed herself one moment, only one. She lay still in the gray light and let herself miss him, fully, without armor, the way you let a wave pass over you, because fighting it only makes it last longer. Then, the moment ended. She rose. She dressed in clean, severe lines. She drew her hair back from her face and looked at the woman in the glass, and the woman looked steadily back at her and did not flinch. The bond could ache all it wanted. It would not get a vote. The board was set. And the quiet woman everyone had long ago stopped watching was about to make her opening move in full view of them all. The call came through just after the northern dawn, on a line wrapped so deep in encryption that even the air around it seemed to hold its breath. Selene Hart took the small device from Marin without a word and crossed to the window. Below her, the Iron Country was waking under a hard, pale sky, smoke rising in slow gray columns, the world cold and indifferent and clean. The glass was cool beneath her free hand. She pressed her palm flat against it, the way some people touch a thing simply to know it is real. "Report," she said. For a moment there was only static. Then a voice came through, soft and high and sweetly empty. The voice of a girl who had been taught her whole life to sound as though there were nothing at all behind her eyes. "The treasury is dust," Cora Vance said, "just as you promised it would be." And then, between one breath and the next, the voice changed. The sweetness fell away like a dropped scarf. What remained underneath was lower, sharper, wide awake. "My uncle is in a panic he cannot quite hide," Cora went on. "He is demanding the king tax the lower wards to cover what has gone missing. He still believes he is the one moving the pieces across the board." "And the king?" Selene asked, unraveling. A pause that stretched. "He spent half the night tearing through the war room looking for paper ledgers that were never written. He keeps saying your name under his breath like a wound he cannot stop pressing on." Selene said nothing for a moment. She watched her own breath fog the glass and slowly fade. "You are doing well, Cora," she said at last. "Keep playing the spoiled queen. Let them believe the throne won itself a pretty, empty prize. Let your uncle hang himself on his own greed. Your time is coming." There was a silence on the line then that was not empty at all. It was full of something old. "You found me in the cold," Cora said quietly. "I have not forgotten it. Whatever this costs me before the end, I owe you everything I have become." The call went dead. Selene stood at the glass a long while after the line had cut out. She did not think of the kingdom then, or the board, or the man 300 miles south who had cast her into winter. She thought of a girl she had found, not so very long before, weeping among the bare hedges of the palace gardens at the dead end of an evening when she should have been seated at the king's table. The memory came back to her whole. The gardens had been silver with frost that night. Selene had stepped out for air, away from the heat and the noise and the smiling teeth of the court, and there in the deep shadow of a stone wall she had found a young woman folded in on herself, trying with everything she had to weep without making a single sound. That was the detail Selene had never been able to let go of. The silence of it. A girl so thoroughly trained in fear that even her grief had learned to stay quiet. Selene had not spoken at first. She had simply lowered herself onto the cold stone bench beside the girl and waited, the way you wait for a frightened animal to decide you are not a threat. Her own warmth in the freezing dark, her own steady breathing, letting her presence become a thing that might be trusted rather than feared. When the girl finally spoke, the words came in broken pieces. An uncle who had raised her the way a man raises livestock, counting her worth only in what she could be traded for. A mother kept somewhere far away, somewhere the girl was never permitted to visit. Her safety dangled in front of her like a key held just out of reach. A cold cellar where the girl had been shut away in the dark for 3 full days. The first time she had ever dared to use the word no. She had been ordered to seduce the king, to make herself soft and lovely and stupid, and to open a door inside his court that her uncle could walk straight through. And if she failed, her mother would be the one to pay for it. Selene had listened to all of it without flinching once, and when the girl had finally run out of words and sat there shaking, certain she had just spoken her own death sentence aloud, Selene had reached out and wiped a single tear from her cheek with the side of her thumb. The skin there had been cold, wet, trembling. "Listen to me," Selene had said, low, steady. "They have taught you that being soft is the same thing as being weak. That is the most useful lie a powerful man ever tells a girl." The young woman had stared at her, not understanding. "A fool is invisible," Selene had told her, "and an invisible woman can walk anywhere she pleases. She can stand in the very center of a room full of men who believe they own her, and listen to every secret they are too arrogant to guard, and not one of them will ever think to watch her hands." She had tilted the girl's chin up gently until their eyes finally met. "You believe your uncle handed you a cage," Selene had said. "Let me teach you how to wear it as a costume. Let me show you exactly where the blade hides inside the silk." And something in the girl had shifted that night. Selene had watched it happen, right there in the frozen garden. The fear had not vanished. Fear cut that deep never fully does. But beneath it, for the first time, a spine had begun quietly to set. That was the thing the court would never understand about Selene Hart. They thought her cold. They mistook her stillness for an absence of feeling, the way shallow people always mistake calm water for empty water. They never once guessed that the quiet was precisely where she kept the fire, banked low and patient, fed not by hatred, but by something far more durable. She did not move the pieces because the game gave her pleasure. She moved them because she had spent a lifetime watching powerful men treat people as things to be used and discarded. And somewhere along that long, hard road, she had decided that she would be the one who counted differently. Maren came to her late that same day with a different kind of report. And the moment Selene saw the captain's face, she understood that the ground was about to move beneath all of it. "There is something underneath the money," Maren said. She set a slim, sealed packet down on the desk and did not let go of it right away, as though releasing it cost her something. "Something I very nearly missed. The accounts the elder controlled, they were never only about his own greed." Selene sat down very slowly. "Tell me." "The labor rings out in the far territories," Maren said. Her voice had gone flat, the way a voice goes flat when it is holding something monstrous at arm's length. "The hidden ones, the ones the council pretends are only rumor. Someone has been feeding them. For years." The room seemed to drop several degrees. "Feeding them what?" Selene said, though some part of her, down in the marrow, already knew. "The young," Maren said, "the children of the outer villages, the families too poor to make noise, the ones no record ever bothered to count, taken quietly, moved quietly, carried away along the very same routes that were meant to carry grain." For a long moment, Selene did not speak at all. Outside the glass, the iron country went about its hard, cold business. The smoke rose. The pale sky stayed uncaring. And somewhere inside her, something that had been frozen solid for months began slowly to turn into something else. Something with heat at the center of it. She had built those roots. With her own hands, over years, thread by careful thread, she had drawn the lines on the maps herself, chosen each way station, trusted the men who ran them, And while she had been balancing ledgers and smoothing a king's wounded pride, someone had been using the very bones of her own creation to carry off the most defenseless souls in the whole pack. "How long?" she said. Her voice did not rise. That was the dangerous thing about her. The angrier Selene Hart became, the quieter she went. "Long," Marin said. "Long before you ever left. The king never saw it. He looked at the elders' votes and the elders' armies, and he looked away from everything underneath, because the votes were useful and the looking away was easy." Selene closed her eyes. So this was the rot at the very root of it. Not merely a grasping elder reaching for a crown. Not merely a vain king too in love with his own reflection to see past it. Underneath all the politics, underneath the betrayal and the cold smile and the empty bed, there had been this all along. A wound in the living heart of the pack that no one had bothered to bind. Because the ones doing the bleeding were the ones nobody had ever bothered to count. When she opened her eyes again, something in them had changed for good. "This was always going to be about the money," she said softly. "Now it is about a great deal more than money." She rose and turned to the window. "I do not simply want him ruined, Marin. I want every soul still alive on those roots found and carried home. I want the men who moved them named out loud, in daylight, where the whole pack can see their faces. And I want the one who gave the orders to understand, before this ends, exactly who it was that finally stopped looking away." Marin held her gaze without blinking. "That will cost more," the captain said. "More time, more risk to Cora, who sits closest to the fire. It would be far cleaner to take the throne, take the gold, and walk away." "Cleaner," Selene agreed, "and worth nothing at all." She let her hand rest on the cold glass again. Below her, the smoke kept rising. "A victory that leaves the helpless in the dark," she said, "is not a victory. It is only a richer kind of failure." Far to the south, in a kingdom going gray with hunger, Damon Raedi was learning the exact shape of his own blindness, one cold hour at a time. The villages were starving now, not in the slow, quiet way of a hard season, but in the sudden, brutal way of a system that has lost the single mind that held it upright. The grain that still existed was not reaching the mouths that needed it. It was stopping, somewhere out along the western roads, vanishing into the hands of men who answered only to the elder. Wesley brought him the truth in the war room, by the light of a single low lamp. "His private forces have seized the western checkpoints," Wesley said. "They are not guarding anything. They are charging tolls on the very shipments we ordered out. They stop the wagons, they take their cut, and what finally reaches the villages is a fraction of what we sent." Damon stood at the window with his back to the room, staring out at the dark. "A shadow government," he said. "Built inside your own," Wesley answered. "While you fought the fire he lit in the treasury, he quietly took the roads out from under you." Damon was silent for a long time. The lamp hissed softly. The cold pressed against the glass. When he finally spoke, the fight had drained out of his voice, and something far harder to listen to had moved in to take its place. "I thought she was organizing paperwork," he said, "all those years. I would walk past her at the long table, bent over her ledgers, the lamplight in her hair, and I would feel this small mean flicker of impatience, that she was not at my side, smiling, making me look like a king." He shook his head slowly. I never once understood that the numbers were the only thing standing between this pack and the wolves at the door. She was holding back a tide of starving, frightened men with nothing but a pen, every single night, and I let myself believe she was doing chores. Wesley said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not have been a cruelty. I told myself I sent her away to protect her, Damon went on, and now his voice had fallen almost to nothing. From his politics, from the crossfire that was coming. I told myself a king carries the heavy burdens alone, so that the ones he loves do not have to. He pressed his open palm flat against the cold glass. But that was a story I built so I would never have to look directly at the real one. And the real one? Wesley asked, very quietly. Damon opened his mouth and found he could not say it. The words sat in his chest like stones, too heavy and too shameful to lift up into the air between them. He had spent his whole life never once admitting fear aloud to anyone. He could not start now, not even here, not even to the one man left who might still forgive him. I do not know, he said at last. It was a lie, and they both heard it land as one. Wesley looked at him for a long moment. Then, gently, the way a man sets down something he knows will break, the beta said the thing his king could not. You could not stand beside someone stronger than you, Wesley said. So you told yourself she was less than she was, and you called the lie a sacrifice. Damon did not answer, but he did not deny it either, and his silence, there in the failing lamplight, was its own kind of confession, the first true one of his life, even if he was not yet brave enough to speak it. She did not smile that last night because she was hiding her pain, did she? He said instead. It was not truly a question anymore. She smiled because she had already seen all of this coming. The hunger, the roads, the rot underneath the floorboards. She saw every bit of it before I did, and she knew I would not listen. And so she stopped wasting her strength trying to save a man who would not let himself be saved. Yes, Wesley said, simply, honestly. Damon closed his eyes. Somewhere out in the dark, the bond stirred beneath his breastbone, that thin, starved, aching pull, dragging him north toward a woman who no longer wanted any part of him. And for the first time, he did not try to crush it down. He let it hurt him. He had the sense now that he had earned every degree of the hurting. He thought of the scent of her that used to live in their rooms, vanilla and crushed pine. He could not summon it any more. The walls had let it go. And the losing of even that small ghost felt like a punishment perfectly fitted to the crime. In the north, Selene sat alone that night with a sealed packet open before her. The names of the lost laid out in Marin's careful, unflinching hand. She read every one. She did not let herself look away from a single name, though each one was its own small wound, though some of them were so young that the bare fact of the numbers written beside them made her hands go still upon the page. She made herself sit with it. She made herself feel the full weight, because looking away was exactly the sin she had set out to end. This was the thing she had carried all along, underneath the strategy and the cold control, the thing none of her enemies would ever have believed of her. She felt everything. She felt all of it, all the time, with a depth that would have drowned a lesser woman whole. The grief and the fury and the unbearable, helpless tenderness for people she had never once met. She had simply learned, across a long, hard life of being overlooked and underestimated, how to take all that feeling and forge it in the quiet into something that could not be shattered by any man's contempt. They had thought her ice. They had never understood that ice is only water that has finally decided to stop being moved by every passing current. She set the packet down. She crossed to the window. The iron country lay below her, hard and cold and waiting, and far beyond it, 300 miles to the south, a kingdom she had once held together with her bare hands was tearing itself apart around a man only now learning the true weight of what he had thrown into the snow. She thought of the girl weeping silently in the frost. She thought of the lost carried off down roads she herself had drawn. And Selene Hart, quiet and unbroken at the top of the cold glass tower, understood that the game had changed shape beneath her hands. It was no longer about a throne. The truth was, it had never really been about a throne at all. It was about every single person a powerful man had ever decided did not need to be counted. And she intended, before the snow melted, to count every last one of them. He came north in the dead of the cold season, and he came alone. That was the part that would have surprised the council, had they known. No army at his back, no banner, no beta riding guard at his shoulder. Damon Reedy left the dying kingdom in the small hours with a single horse and the clothes on his back, and he rode toward the iron country the way a man walks toward the only light in a long, dark hall. Not because he believed it would save him, but because he could no longer bear the dark. The bond led him. He had stopped fighting it somewhere on the second day. It lived under his breastbone, that thin, starved thread, and the farther north he rode, the more it pulled, until it was less a feeling than a direction, a compass needle made of want, dragging him toward her across the frozen miles. He told himself he came to negotiate, to bargain for grain, to save his people. That was the cleanest of the lies he carried, and even he no longer believed it. The truth rode with him in the cold, and it was simpler, and it was worse. He came because he could not stand one more night in a bed that still smelled faintly of nothing where her scent used to be. He came because a man can only perform strength for an empty room for so long before the performance starts to kill him. He came because he missed her, and he had finally run out of places to hide from that. In the high glass tower, Selene Hart felt him before she ever saw him. She was standing at the window with the morning reports in her hand when the bond woke. It did not stir gently this time. It did not ache like an old wound in the quiet. It came alive all at once, a sudden heat blooming behind her ribs, fierce and bright and entirely unwelcome. And she knew the shape of it the way she knew her own pulse. He was close. The papers stilled in her hand. Her breath went shallow. And for one treacherous moment, before her mind could rise up and take command, her whole body simply leaned toward the feeling, the way it had leaned toward him 1,000 times by 1,000 fires. She set the reports down with great care. "Marin," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "He is here." The captain was already moving toward the door. "I will turn him away at the gate. He has no business standing within these walls." No. It surprised them both, that single word. Selene did not look away from the glass. Below, far down at the foot of the tower, a lone rider had come to a stop. And even from this height, Even before she could make out his face, her body knew the line of his shoulders. "Let him come up," she said. "I will not hide from him in my own house, and I will not let him leave thinking I ran." Marin hesitated at the door. "Are you certain that is wise?" Selene was quiet a moment. "No," she said honestly, "but it is necessary. Some doors have to be closed from the inside, Marin, with the person standing in them." When the doors finally slid open and he stepped through, the bond hit them both like a wave breaking. His scent reached her first. Cedar and storm and cold travel, and underneath it all the warm animal truth of him. The smell her body had learned to read as home before her mind had ever agreed to the word. It flooded the careful, clean air of the tower and undid something in her chest she had spent months teaching to stay shut. She did not let it show. That was the discipline of a lifetime. And it held. But it cost her. It cost her everything she had. Damon stopped just inside the room. He looked wrecked, thinner than she remembered. The sharp planes of his face cut sharper now by hunger and sleeplessness. Dark hollows beneath his eyes, and yet the moment his gaze found her, something in him seemed to steady, the way a drowning man steadies when his feet finally touch the bottom. "Selene," he said, just her name, as though her name were the only word he had carried all this way. "You rode north alone," she said, cool, even. "That was either very brave or very foolish. With you, it was so often both." "I had to see you." "You had to see what you destroyed," she corrected. "There is a difference. Men like you always confuse the two." He flinched. She watched it land, and she was ashamed, in some small buried corner, of how much satisfaction the flinch gave her, because satisfaction was a kind of caring, and she did not want to care. "The pack is starving," he said. "I know. I built the roads that are no longer feeding it." She let that sit. "I know exactly what is happening down there, Damon. I knew before you did. I have known for a very long time." He took a step closer. The bond surged with him, pulling, and she had to plant her feet against the urge to close the distance herself. "I did not come for the pack," he said. "No? No?" His voice dropped low and rough. "That is the lie I packed for the road. The truth is uglier, and I am too tired to keep dressing it up. I came because I cannot sleep. I came because the bond is tearing a hole in me, and I would rather stand here and let you despise me to my face than spend one more night reaching for the empty side of a bed." The room went very still. Outside, the smoke rose against the pale sky, indifferent as ever. Inside, the air had become a held breath. "You do not get to say those things to me," Selene said. And for the first time, her voice was not perfectly steady. A thread of something raw moved through it. "You forfeited the right to ache for me the night you chose your crown over my face." "I know." "You looked at me across that chamber after 5 years, and you saw a problem you had finally solved." "I know, Selene." He was closer now. She had not seen him move. Or perhaps she had moved. The space between them had grown dangerously thin, and the bond hummed in it like a struck wire. "And I have spent every cold mile since learning the truth I was too proud to look at then." "Then say it," she breathed. "If you came all this way to bleed, then bleed honestly. Say the real thing. I have earned the real thing." He looked at her for a long moment, and then, for the first time in his life, out loud, to the one person it could never again be taken back from. He gave it to her. "I did not send you away to protect you," he said. "That was the noble story. The true story is that I could not stand beside a woman stronger than me and survive the size of my own pride. You saw straight through me, Selene. Every day. You saw the frightened boy under the alpha, and you never once used it against me. And somehow that made it worse. I could not bear to be known that completely. So I pushed away the one person who truly saw me. And I told the whole pack it was a sacrifice." His voice broke on the last word. "I gave away the only thing that ever made me feel safe, because being safe meant admitting I needed you, and I had built my entire life around never needing anyone." The confession landed in the quiet and stayed there. And Selene Hart, who had planned for armies and frozen vaults and the slow, patient ruin of a kingdom, found she had not planned for this. For honesty. For the one weapon she had no armor against. The bond surged again, and this time her body won a single inch of the war. She did not decide to move. That was the terrible part. Her hand simply rose, the way it had risen toward him 1,000 times by firelight, and her fingers found the rough line of his jaw, the stubble there catching against her skin, and the touch went through them both like current through water. He made a sound low in his chest, a broken, helpless sound. His own hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm flat against his face, his eyes falling shut as though her touch were the first warmth he had felt in months. And perhaps it was. "Selene," he murmured against her wrist, and his breath was hot on the thin skin there, and she felt it travel all the way up her arm and into the buried places she had ordered shut. They were close now, too close. She could feel the heat of him along the whole front of her body, could smell the cedar and storm of him filling her lungs with every breath, could see the desperate hope kindling in his eyes. And the bond was singing now, a high, bright pull that wanted nothing in the world but to collapse the last sliver of distance between them. His forehead dropped to hers. Their breath mingled in the small, charged space. His hands found her waist, careful, reverent, the way they had been on that long-ago night by the fire, learning her again, as if she might vanish. Her own fingers had curled into the front of his coat without her permission. Her heart was slamming. The years fell away. For one suspended moment, she was not a queen or an architect, or a woman with a board to move. She was only a woman who had loved a man, and been loved badly, and never quite stopped wanting the way it had felt when he got it right. His mouth brushed the corner of hers, the barest touch, a question, and every cell in her body screamed yes. That was the exact moment Selene Hart understood the danger she was truly in. Not the danger of armies, not of frozen accounts or hostile elders or roads gone dark with stolen children. The real danger stood here, breathing against her mouth, smelling like home, offering her the one thing she had wanted most in all the world, the chance to be soft again. The chance to set down the weight, the chance to fall back into warm, familiar hands and let someone else hold the sky for a while. It would be so easy. It would feel so much like being saved. And that was precisely why she could not allow it. Because she knew this man. She knew the exact texture of his tenderness. And she knew how quickly, when his pride next felt the cold, That tenderness could curdle into the look he had given her across the council table. Forgiveness given here, now, in the heat of a bond neither of them controlled, would not be forgiveness at all. It would be surrender dressed up as love. It would be every woman who had ever been taught that a man's late tears were worth more than her own steady years. She drew back. It was the hardest single motion of her life. Harder than walking out the chamber door. Harder than draining the vaults. Her body fought her the whole way, the bond shrieking in protest, every nerve in her straining toward the warmth she was choosing to refuse. But she drew back. "No," she said softly. His eyes opened. The hope in them was unbearable, and she made herself bear it. "Selene." "No, Damon." She stepped out of the circle of his hands, and the cold rushed in to fill the space where his heat had been, and she let it. She welcomed it. The cold was honest. The cold did not lie to her. Not like this. Not in the heat of a bond that does not care whether you have changed. Not because you finally hurt enough to be sorry. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I would do anything to—" "I believe you," she said. And she did. That was the cruelty of it. "I believe every word you said. That is what makes this so dangerous. You have always been most honest in the moment you most need something." She drew a steadying breath. "Sorrow is not the same as change, Damon. A man who weeps is not the same as a man who has done the work. And I have spent too much of my life mistaking the first for the second." He stood there, undone, his hands still half raised toward the place she no longer was. "Then what do I do?" he said hoarsely. "Tell me what to do." "You go home," she said. "You face what you broke. Not for me, for them. For the people starving because you were too proud to keep the one who fed them." Her voice gentled just slightly, and that gentleness cost her more than all her coldness had. "If you are ever going to be worth standing beside, Damon, you will have to become that man on your own. Where I cannot see you. Where there is no bond pulling you toward the right thing. Only your own two hands. And the choice." The bond ached between them, raw and protesting, as he turned at last toward the door. He stopped there. He did not look back. "That night," he said quietly, "by the fire. Do you remember it?" Her throat tightened. "Every day," she said. "It is the thing I am most angry at you for. That you showed me what you could be, and then chose so much less." He left without another word, and Selene Hart stood alone in the high glass tower long after the doors had sealed, her hand still warm where it had touched his face, the cedar and storm of him still ghosting through the air, her whole careful body trembling with the effort of the thing she had just done. She had not wept when he betrayed her. She wept now, quietly, fiercely, alone, the way that girl in the frozen garden had once wept, except that these were not the tears of someone breaking. They were the tears of someone holding. Someone who had reached the very edge of her own longing, looked down into the warm, easy dark of it, and chosen, at terrible cost, to keep her own 2 feet on solid ground. When Marin found her some time later, the tears were gone. The face was calm again. The fire was banked back down behind the quiet. "He is gone," Marin said. It was not quite a question. "He is gone," Selene agreed. "And the plan?" Selene looked out at the cold country below, at the smoke and the iron and the long road south where a lone rider was already disappearing into the white. "The plan holds," she said, but something in her had shifted, and she knew it, and she did not pretend otherwise. The bond had nearly taken her. For one breath, she had wanted to be saved more than she had wanted to be free. She would have to watch that wound now, carefully, because the most dangerous threat to everything she was building no longer waited for her in the South. It lived inside her own chest, and it still, against all reason, loved him. The message came in the blackest part of the night, and it came broken. Marin brought it to her without a word, the small device trembling faintly in her steady hand, which told Selene everything before she ever read the screen. Marin's hands did not tremble, not for armies, not for frozen vaults, not for anything, until now. The words were few. They had been sent in haste, in fragments, in the private cipher only 3 people in the world could read. "He knows, or he is close, watching me now. If the line goes quiet, do not come. Then nothing." Selene read it once, then again. The cold of the glass tower seemed to press in from every side at once. "When did this arrive?" she asked. "Moments ago. The line went dead the instant after." Marin's jaw was tight. She managed to send it, and then someone took the device, or she dropped it, or worse. We have no way to know which. Selene set the small screen face down on the desk, very gently, as though setting it down hard might shatter something far larger. Cora was caught. The girl from the frozen garden. The girl who had learned to hide a blade inside her silk. The girl who had walked into the lion's mouth on Selene's own promise that she would never be left there, was caught. And the lion was Hadrian. The same man who had once shut her in a cold cellar in the dark for 3 days, the first time she dared to say no. Selene did not have to imagine what waited for the girl now. She knew. She had wiped the memory of it off the girl's cheek with her own thumb. For a long moment, Selene did not move at all. She had built her whole life on stillness, on the discipline of feeling everything and showing nothing. But this was a different kind of stillness. The stillness of a woman standing at the exact center of a trap she had not seen close around her. "Tell me the cost," she said finally. "All of it. Do not soften it for me." Marin did not soften it. "If we move tonight to pull her out, we move loud," the captain said. "We tip our hand. The moment Hadrian sees a northern force reaching into his house for one girl, he knows the whole shape of it. He knows you are alive and circling, and that she was yours from the start. He goes to ground. The roads go cold. Every man who carried someone down them scatters into the dark, and the evidence she has been gathering for months, the names, the roots, the proof, vanishes with them." "And the lost," Selene said quietly. "Stay lost," Marin said. "We lose the one chance to drag all of it into daylight at once. We might save the girl, and in saving her, lose everyone she came to save." Selene closed her eyes. There it was, laid out clean and cold on the table between them. The oldest arithmetic in the world. One life against many. One known face against a crowd of nameless ones. The piece against the board. And the terrible thing, the thing that made her breath go thin, was that she could already hear the answer. The strategist in her had answered before her heart even finished asking. The cold, clear voice that had drained a kingdom's vaults without a tremor was already speaking, low and reasonable. Let her hold. The girl is strong. She was trained for exactly this. A few more days and the trap closes on Hadrian Hole, and the lost come home, and one operative's suffering buys the freedom of dozens. That is the math. That is the only math that wins. Selene opened her eyes, and she was afraid. Not of Hadrian, not of failure. She was afraid of the voice, because she recognized it. It was his voice. It was the exact voice that had once weighed a niece's body against a seat at a king's table and found the trade acceptable. The voice that counted a child by what she could buy. The voice that looked at a living, breathing, frightened person and saw a piece to be spent. She had spent her whole life despising that voice in other men. And here it was, speaking from inside her own chest, wearing the reasonable mask of strategy, asking her to leave a girl in the dark for the greater good. "Marin," she said, and her voice had gone very low. "Tell me the truth. If I let her stay in that house to protect the plan, what does that make me?" Marin was quiet a moment. She was not a woman who flattered. "It makes you the kind of leader who wins," she said. "Most of the great ones spent someone to get there. That is simply how it has always been done." "That is not what I asked." Marin met her eyes. "It makes you a little more like him," she said honestly. "Just a little, and that little is how it always begins." The words landed exactly where Selene had aimed them, because she had asked the question precisely so that someone would say the thing out loud that she could not bear to say to herself. She turned to the window. The iron country lay below, black and cold under a starless sky, and somewhere far to the south, a girl sat in the dark waiting to learn whether the woman who had promised to count her had meant it, or whether she too was just another number in a larger sum. And Selene Hart understood, standing there, that this was the real test. Not the vaults, not the bond, not the cold smile she had perfected for a man who deserved it. This was the night the whole thing meant something or meant nothing, because anyone could burn a kingdom down. Cruelty was easy. Cruelty was the most common thing in the world. The only thing that had ever separated her from the men she fought was a single stubborn principle. And the principle was this: that no person, no matter how useful, was ever only a piece. The moment she spent Cora to win, she would win as Hadrian. She would simply have better manners about it. "No," she said aloud to the dark. Marin turned. "No, we are not leaving her." Selene faced the room again, and something had settled in her face. Something quieter and harder and far more dangerous than the cold she had worn until now. "And we are not blowing the plan to save her either. Those are the two easy answers, and I refuse them both. There may not be a third. Then we build one." Selene crossed to the long table and swept the maps clear with the flat of her hand. "By dawn. We do not have longer than dawn." Far to the south, Damon Red was learning what it meant to do the work where no one could see him. He had ridden home from the Iron Country a hollowed man. The bond still ached in him, raw from the near surrender in the tower, from the brush of her mouth and the cold rush of the air when she stepped away. He had wanted to hate her for it. He had found, somewhere on the long road back, that he could not. She had been right. That was the unbearable part. Sorrow was not change. A man who wept was not yet a man who had done anything. So he did something. He did not tell the council. He did not call for an army. Quietly, in the dead hours, he began to undo the small corruptions he had spent years ignoring. He found the men still loyal not to his crown, but to the pack itself, the few who had not been bought, and he began to gather them. He listened, for the first time in his life, to the people in the lower wards. He stood in the cold market squares and heard them, truly heard them, and he did not flinch from the doubt in their faces. He learned slowly where the western roads bled. He learned which of the elders' men could be turned. He gathered it patiently, the way he had once watched her gather numbers, and mistaken it for chores. He did not do it to win her back. He had finally understood that doing it to win her back would only be the old selfishness in a new coat. He did it because it was the work. Because somewhere out there were souls he had failed to protect, moving down roads he had let go dark. Because a man who wanted to be worth standing beside a woman like that had to first become worth standing beside anyone at all. And so, 300 miles apart, on the same starless night, the man and the woman were each preparing for the same dawn, and neither of them yet knew it. In the tower, the third answer took shape on the cleared table. It was riskier than anything Selene had attempted. Far riskier. The clean play would have been patience. The clean play would have spent the girl. This was not the clean play. This was a single coordinated strike, threaded through the eye of a needle that would crack Hadrian's house open from the inside before he could scatter. Free Cora in the same motion that exposed the roads and bring every piece of evidence into the light all at once, while she still had it. It traded safety for speed. It traded her careful months of patience for a few violent hours. If a single thread slipped, she lost everything. The girl, the lost, the bored. All of it on one throw. This could end you, Marin said, studying it. If any part of this fails, you do not get a second move. He buries the proof, he buries the girl, and you spend the rest of your life knowing you had the cold answer in your hand and threw it away. I know. The patient play is safer. The patient play is his play, Selene said. I would rather lose as myself than win as him. She laid her finger on the southern roads. Send word to Cain. I need the shadow guard moving before first light. And I need the proof Cora has been gathering pulled out of that house tonight, before Hadrian thinks to destroy it. She will know how to get it to us. She was trained by the best. A ghost of something crossed Marin's face, not quite a smile. She was, the captain agreed. Selene stood back from the table and looked at the thing she had built. It was beautiful and terrible, and balanced on the edge of a knife. And it asked her to gamble everything she had spent months acquiring on the single belief that a person was worth more than a plan. She thought of the girl in the frozen garden. She thought of the names laid out in Marin's careful hand. She thought, for one unguarded moment, of a man riding south through the white, doing she knew not what with the wreckage she had left him. And she felt no triumph. That was the thing none of her enemies would ever understand. There was no triumph in this, no cold pleasure, only the heavy, clean weight of a choice made right at the precise moment it would have been easier to make it wrong. Marin, she said as the captain reached the door, if this fails, if I have miscounted, Marin waited. Then it fails because I refused to spend a girl to buy a crown, Selene said. And I can live with losing that way. I could not live with winning the other. Marin inclined her head, the old soldier's gesture of respect she gave to almost no one. That, she said, is why we followed you north. Not because you are clever. The world is full of clever. Because you stopped to pick up the girl crying in the garden when no one was watching. And you never once put her down. Then she was gone, and the orders went out into the dark, and the dawn began its slow, cold climb toward the edge of the world. Selene Hart stood alone at the glass. She had been wrong about herself once, in the high, cold pride of having a plan for everything. She had believed she was untouchable. The bond had taught her otherwise. This night had taught her otherwise. She was not untouchable. She could lose. She could lose all of it by morning. And she had chosen the path most likely to cost her everything, because the other path would have cost her the one thing she was not willing to trade: herself. Below her, the Iron Country waited. Far to the south, a kingdom held its breath. And somewhere in a dark room, in a hostile house, a girl who had once learned to weep in silence was holding on, because the woman who had found her had promised, and the woman who had found her did not break her promises to the people that the world had taught to expect nothing. The board was set. The throw was made. And Selene Hart turned from the window to meet the dawn that would tell her whether mercy and victory could, just this once, be carried in the same two hands. The dawn came gray and slow, and with it came the throw. Far to the south, in the dark belly of Hadrian's house, the third answer Selene had built on the edge of a knife began to move. She watched it unfold from a command vehicle rolling steadily toward the southern border, the reports arriving in fragments through Marin's earpiece, each one a heartbeat she could not control. This was the part she hated most, the part where the board left her hands entirely. She had set every piece across a long, cold winter. Now she could only listen and breathe and trust the people she had chosen to trust. Teams are inside the perimeter, Marin murmured, quiet so far. And Cora, a pause, the worst kind of pause, the kind with static crawling through the middle of it. No contact yet. Selene said nothing. Her hands lay folded in her lap, perfectly still, which was how anyone who truly knew her would have understood that she was screaming somewhere far down inside. The cold came in through the seams of the vehicle. She let it. The cold was honest. It kept her sharp. The first thread slipped at the worst possible moment. "They have lost the East Corridor," Marin said suddenly, her voice going hard and bright with alarm. Hadrian moved his men in the night. He changed the shape of the house. The route we planned is sealed shut. Selene's chest drew tight as a fist. This was it. This was the exact moment the cold play had warned her about. The moment she had been told to fear when she chose mercy over certainty. One thread gone, and the whole weave straining. If the team could not reach the girl, if Hadrian had already begun to scatter into the dark, then she had thrown away a safe and certain victory for nothing. This cold, reasonable voice in her chest would be proven right, and a girl would pay, in the dark, for a principle. For one terrible breath, Selene tasted the full weight of losing everything. The lost, the proof, the board, the girl she had sworn to count. All of it balanced now on a single thread in a hostile house 300 miles away, where she could not reach to hold it. "Reroute," she said, calm, iron over the fear. "She knows that house better than any map we ever drew of it. If the planned door is sealed, then she makes her own. Trust her. She was never a piece we placed on the board. She is a player, so let her play." The static stretched, 3 seconds, then 5. An eternity folded into the narrow space between two heartbeats. Selene did not breathe through any of it. And then Marin's gloved hand rose to her ear, and her whole posture changed at once. "Contact," she breathed. "It is her. She is moving. She has the proof in hand, and she is walking it out herself." Selene let her eyes fall shut for exactly 1 second. 1. Then she opened them, and the queen was back in the room behind her own face. Because the girl from the frozen garden had not waited to be rescued. She had heard the door seal in front of her, and she had not panicked, and she had not frozen the way fear had once taught her to freeze. She had done the thing Selene had pressed into her on those cold nights long ago. She had looked at the cage closing around her, and she had worn it as a costume just long enough to walk straight out through the front of it. The truth tucked warm against her heart. While every man in that house was still looking for a soldier and missing the girl, the blade had been in the silk the whole time. It always had been. The fall of the kingdom, when it finally came, was not a battle. That was the thing the council would never have been able to predict, the thing that made it so absolute. They had braced for war. They had sharpened their swords and counted their soldiers and watched the northern horizon for an army. And war never came. What came instead, as the pale sun dragged itself up over the ice-bound peaks, was the truth. It came all at once, and it came everywhere. On every screen, every public glass, every tablet in every cold square across the whole territory, the proof Cora had carried out of the dark bloomed into the light of morning. The roads, the way stations, the names of the men who had moved the helpless along them like so much freight. The cold accounting of a trade no one had wanted to admit was real, laid open at last for every soul in the pack to read with their own eyes. And the broadcast spared no one. It showed Hadrian's hand in all of it, undeniable, his own cold orders and his own cold words. But it did not stop with the elder. It showed the long years of looking away. It showed a king who had taken a corrupt man's votes and never once asked what they cost. It showed, plainly and without mercy, exactly how a rot takes root and spreads. Not only in the one who feeds it in the dark, but in every powerful person who chooses, day after comfortable day, not to look. In the courtyard of the palace, Damon Raid watched his own failure scroll across the great glass above the gates, and he did not flinch from a single line of it. That was new. The old Damon would have raged. He would have ordered the screens cut, and the broadcast silenced, and the messenger blamed and dragged away. The man standing in the cold snow now simply watched, his jaw set hard, his eyes bright with something that was not anger. And he let the truth land on him in full view of the people he had failed. Because somewhere in the long, cold nights of the season just past, he had stopped being a man who needed to look innocent, and had started, slowly and painfully, to become a man who needed to be honest. He had spent those nights doing quiet work no one had seen, finding the few men still loyal to the pack rather than to his crown, listening, for the first time in his life, to the frightened voices in the lower wards, learning where the western roads bled and who could be turned back toward the light. He had not done it to win her back. He had finally understood that doing it to win her back would only be the old selfishness wearing a kinder coat. He had done it because it was the work, and the work was owed. So when the horn sounded at the southern gates, the men who formed up at his back were not there because a king commanded them. They were there because they had chosen to be. The convoy came at the head of the rising day, a long dark line of armored transports, throwing up sheets of gray snow as they breached the outer wall and rolled into the courtyard. They flew no colors of the kingdom. They flew the hard iron banner of the north. Damon's hand went to his sword out of pure old instinct. "Invasion!" a voice shouted somewhere. "The north has come for the throne. To arms, to arms." But the cry did not catch. The men around him did not surge. They held, and they watched, and they waited, because their king had taught them, in the quiet weeks just past, to look before they killed. Damon stepped forward into the open courtyard, blade in hand, his heart a war drum against his ribs. He had told himself, on the long road home, that he was ready now for anything. He was not ready for what stepped out of the transports. The doors hissed open along the whole line at once, and the shadow guard emerged. His shadow guard, the elite he had believed, to the very marrow of him, answered to his word and his blood. They flowed out into the snow in dark, precise ranks and formed a perimeter across the entire courtyard, weapons lowered but ready in 100 steady hands, and not one of them so much as turned an eye toward him for an order. They had never been his. They had been hers from the start, the way everything that mattered had been hers, and he had simply mistaken the appearance of command for the substance of it, the way he had mistaken so much for so long. And then, from the lead vehicle, she stepped down into the snow. Selene. She took the breath clean out of his chest. She was not the soft Luna of his memory, the woman who had fallen asleep against his heart by a winter fire. She was not even the cold operative he had faced in the glass tower. She was something he had no name for. She wore a pale coat over clean dark lines, her dark hair drawn back from her face, and she carried an authority so complete and so quiet that the gathering, restless, half-rioting crowd fell silent the moment she came into their view. The very air in the courtyard seemed to reorder itself around the fact of her, and her scent reached him on the cold wind, vanilla and crushed pine. It nearly brought him to his knees right there, before a single word had been spoken. She did not look at him with hatred. He could have borne hatred. Hatred would have meant he still lived somewhere inside her. She looked at him with a calm, clinical, almost gentle indifference. And that was infinitely worse, because it told him with perfect precision exactly how far past him she had already traveled. "Put the blade away, Damon," she said. Her voice carried clear and amplified across the hushed courtyard. It is an old answer to a question no one in this place is asking anymore. His sword lowered, an inch, then another. And that was the moment Hadrian made his final move. The great doors of the palace burst open behind them, and the elder spilled out into the cold, flanked by his private mercenaries, his face gone the gray of old ash with the understanding that his life's work was crumbling in real time across every screen in the land. "Kill her!" he shrieked, flinging out a trembling hand toward Selene. "She is a traitor to the pack. Cut her down, all of you. Kill the traitor before she poisons every." He did not finish the word. Selene did not so much as flinch. She simply tilted her head, the smallest motion, the kind of small motion a woman makes when a long-expected guest finally arrives at her door. And from behind Hadrian, from his very own shadow, where she had stood unseen this entire time, playing the empty, pretty, decorative prize, Cora Vance stepped forward into the light. She was not wearing silk anymore. The vacant doll was gone. The soft, empty voice was gone. What stood at the elder's back now was lean and dark-clad and razor calm, and in one fluid motion she had practiced 10,000 times alone in the dark. She drew a concealed blade and laid the edge of it precisely against the great artery of his throat. His mercenaries went rigid. Not one of them moved. "Stand down, uncle," Cora said. Her voice did not climb. It did not sweeten. It did not tremble in the slightest. "You taught me to be a thing that men do not bother to watch. You should have watched." The crowd gasped as a single body, and Damon stood in the snow with his sword hanging half forgotten from his hand, and felt the last illusion of his old world shatter around him like river ice giving way underfoot. The empty prize had been the dagger all along. The discarded wife had been the entire war. He had been losing from the very first cold smile in the candlelight, and he had simply been too proud, for far too long, to read the board for what it truly was. "You orchestrated all of it," he said, and his voice came out hollow, almost wondering, the voice of a man waking from a long fever. The sword finally dropped from his open hand. It rang against the frozen stones, one small, bright, dead note in the vast silence. "From the very beginning, from the night you smiled at me, you let me banish you." "You banished yourself, Damon," Selene said. She walked forward, unhurried, into the open center of the courtyard, and the crowd parted before her without a single raised hand. "You believed the bond meant that I was bound to follow your choices. You forgot, the way men like you always forget, that a bond runs in both directions. The night you broke it to save your pride, you set me free to save every single person you were too frightened to protect." She turned away from him then, deliberately, to face the gathered pack. The starving, the frightened, the doubting, the countless people who had been failed by every powerful man who had ever decided, in a warm private room, that they simply did not need to be counted. And when she spoke to them, the iron in her voice softened into something else entirely. "People of this pack," she said, "your king emptied your stores to buy the loyalty of the man on those screens above you. The man who sold your children down the very roads you trusted to bring you your bread." A low sound rolled through the crowd, grief and fury, and a terrible dawning recognition. "The ones taken on those roads are being found," Selene went on, and her voice did not waver. "As of this morning, every name on that list, every last one, they are being brought home as I stand here, and the men who carried them will answer for it in the open, in the daylight, in front of all of you, where no one with power will ever again be permitted to look the other way." The sound rose again, and this time there was hope braided through it. raw and disbelieving, and almost too much to bear. "And the grain?" she said. "I have spent the long last of this winter liquidating the private fortune of Damon Reed. Every hidden coin he ever set aside for himself alone. It has been turned into food, and that food is already rolling into your villages as I speak to you now. No tolls, no tithes, no armed man at a checkpoint taking his cut from your children's mouths. It is yours. It was always meant to be yours." The crowd broke, not into a riot, into something Selene had scarcely allowed herself to hope for. A vast rolling wave of pure relief, of weeping, of a frightened people exhaling at last after a long and brutal holding of the breath. Somewhere off to the side, a single voice began to call her name, and then another took it up, and another, until it moved through the whole courtyard like a tide. She let it wash over her without the faintest flicker of pride, because the point had never been to be cheered. The point had been to make sure the ones who had been treated as nothing were finally, fully seen. "Hadrian will face a neutral tribunal," she said, when the sound had finally ebbed. "Not my justice, not the kind powerful people hand down behind closed doors. Open justice, watched by every one of you. The exact kind of justice he spent his whole life making certain the powerless would never be allowed to have." Cora pressed her blade a hair closer, and one by one the elders' mercenaries let their weapons fall into the snow, and just like that, it was over. The empire that had taken a lifetime to rot through fell in the space of a single gray morning, and then there was only Damon, sinking slowly to his knees in the cold. He had gone down without being forced. That was the thing Selene noticed, the thing that moved her somewhere deep, though she did not let an inch of it show on her face. No hand had pushed him. The alpha aura, the towering pride, the crown he had traded a marriage and a kingdom to keep. All of it had simply evaporated off him like breath in winter air, leaving behind only a man kneeling in the snow of his own long making. "The throne is yours, Selene," he said. His voice was raw, stripped clean of every performance he had ever worn. "It always was. I was only ever standing in the place that belonged to you, and calling the view my own." He bowed his dark head. "Take my life if the law demands it. I will not run from it now. Only spare the men who followed my foolish orders. The fault was mine alone. Let it stay mine." The courtyard had gone utterly silent. Selene walked slowly toward him across the snow, and stopped a single pace away, and looked down at the bowed head of the man she had once fallen asleep against beside a winter fire. A lifetime and a whole self ago. The bond stirred between them, quiet now, aching, honest at last. She let herself feel it. She did not look away from it, the way she had once been so practiced at looking away. She had learned in the high cold tower with his scent fading from her hands that strength had never been the absence of feeling. It was feeling all of it, fully, to the bottom, and then choosing anyway. "I do not want your life, Damon," she said softly, the words meant for him alone. He lifted his head. "And I do not want your throne." She straightened, and her voice rose once more to carry across the silent waiting pack. "Because the throne itself was the rot. One person ruling by the accident of blood and the size of their teeth, answerable to no one above them and no one below. That is how a Hadrian grows fat in the dark. That is how the helpless vanish down trusted roads, while a king looks the other way and calls it governing. She let her gaze travel out over the crowd, over the kneeling king, over the whole broken and beautiful pack she had set out across a long winter to save. The age of kings who rule alone, she said, is over. And then, only to Damon, quiet as the snow falling soft around them both, wearing the faint ghost of the very smile that had haunted him since the first cold night by the candlelight. She said the single word he had been waiting for since he read it on a black card in an empty room. Checkmate. She did not say it with cruelty. That was the thing that undid him completely, there in the snow. She said it the way a patient teacher closes a long and difficult lesson, without triumph, almost impossibly with tenderness, as though she were sorry, truly sorry, that it had cost so very much to teach him the one thing he had needed his whole life to finally understand. That he had never once been the master of the board, that the quiet woman bent over her ledgers by lamplight, the one he had walked past 1,000 careless times, the one he had thrown out into the snow to spare his own fragile pride, had been the only one playing the real game from the very beginning, and kneeling there in the cold, stripped of everything he had ever mistaken for himself, Damon Reedy did the one honest thing still left to a man who had finally, completely run out of lies. He stayed down, and he let the better player win. The change of power, when it came, was not a coup. That was the thing the histories would never quite know how to describe, because there was no battle to name, no field to mark, no river of blood to count. The old order did not fall the way old orders are supposed to fall. It was dismantled, quietly, lawfully. Piece by careful piece, the way a patient hand takes apart a thing that was built wrong from the start, so that something better can be built in its place. The single throne was gone. In its place rose a council, open and answerable, its doors left unlocked, its ledgers laid where any soul in the pack could read them. No more rule by the accident of blood. No more crown handed down to whoever had been born with the largest teeth. Selene Hart sat at the head of that council, not as a queen, as a chairwoman. The distinction mattered to her more than anyone else seemed to understand, and she made certain, every single day, that it kept mattering. Hadrian faced his tribunal in the open, as she had promised, watched by all, judged by all. The powerless he had spent a lifetime treating as nothing sat in the front rows, and watched him answer for every name, and Cora oversaw the sentencing herself, dry-eyed and steady. The girl from the frozen garden grown all the way into her own spine at last. The lost came home. Not all of them. Selene would carry the not all of them for the rest of her life, the way you carry a stone in a pocket you never empty. But many. Enough that the outer villages, for the first time in living memory, learned what it felt like to be seen. And Damon Reid was given a choice: exile or assimilation into the new world. They stripped him of his title, his wealth, his palace, everything he had once mistaken for himself. They left him a modest cabin on the far edge of the territory and a road that led out if he wished to take it. He did not take it. He stayed. For a long stretch of cold and then thawing seasons, Damon Reid did the one thing he had never done in his life. He worked with his hands where no one watched, for no reward at all, He chopped wood until his palms blistered and split and grew hard. He mended fences along the property line. He learned the slow, honest labor of a man who was no longer trying to look like anything to anyone. There was no aura to project out here, no room to dominate, no counsel to perform strength for. There was only the wood and the cold and the work, and the long, quiet hours in which a man is finally left alone with the truth of what he is. And in those hours, Damon did the harder labor. He took apart the man he had been, the way the new council had taken apart his throne, plank by plank. He looked at the boy who had been so terrified of needing anyone that he had thrown away the one person who truly saw him. He did not look away. He had spent his whole life looking away, and he understood now, blistered and humbled in the cold, that the looking away had been the root of all of it. She had told him, in the high glass tower, that he would have to become a better man on his own. Where she could not see him, where there was no bond pulling him toward the right thing, only his own two hands, and the choice. So that was what he did, not to win her back. He had to keep reminding himself of that in the beginning, because the old selfishness was cunning and it wore good disguises. He did it because it was owed, because somewhere out there were people he had failed, and a pack he had starved, and a woman he had wronged. And the only honest way to answer any of it was to simply become someone who would not do it again. The seasons turned. The snow came and went and came again. And slowly, without his noticing the exact moment it happened, the work stopped being penance and started being a life. She came to him in the soft green of a late spring evening. He felt her before he saw her. The bond, long dormant, suppressed, half forgotten in the daily labor of becoming someone new, flared suddenly to life under his breastbone like a window thrown open in a sealed room. He was at the outdoor pump, washing the dirt of the day from his hands, the cold water running over his knuckles, when the prickle climbed the back of his neck and he went still. He turned. Selene stood at the edge of his property. She wore no pale coat of power now, no dark, severe lines, just a simple sweater the color of deep evening and a pair of worn jeans, her dark hair loose for once around her shoulders. And she looked in the failing gold light, less like the chairwoman of a council and more like the woman who had once argued with him over maps by a winter fire, but the power was still there. It would always be there now. It radiated off her, quiet and undeniable, woven all the way through her, no longer a coat she put on, but a thing she simply was. He dried his hands slowly on a rough towel, and he kept his distance. He did not presume he had any right to close it. That was new too. The tribunal sentenced Hadrian to the deep wards, Selene said, breaking the long quiet between them. For the rest of his life, Cora oversaw it herself. She did not flinch once. She learned from the best, Damon said. His voice came out rough from disuse. He looked down at the wet ground between them. You built a better world, Selene. One I could not even have imagined how to want. He swallowed. I have spent these seasons in awe of it. Of you. Selene crossed her arms, studying him in the gold light, taking the measure of him the way she took the measure of everything. You have lost weight, she observed. You look like a man who splits wood for a living, not a king. Good, Damon said simply. I never want to look like one again. He lifted his head and met her eyes, fully, without a single mask between them. And he did not reach for the old confession. He had said it once in the tower, the truest and hardest thing he had ever spoken aloud, and to say it again would only be asking her to carry the weight of it for him a second time. He had learned out here that there were things a man had to set down himself. "You broke my heart, Damon," Selene said, and her voice was quiet and steady, and it did not shake. "Not because you took another woman to your side. I always knew Cora was a play on the board. You broke my heart because you looked me in the eye after 5 years, and you lied to me. You denied me the right to fight for my own home. You decided, alone in the dark, that my life was something to be spent. And then you smiled at me like you were being kind." "I know," he said softly. "I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I did not come into this clearing expecting it. I needed you to see what I have been building, so you would know it was real. So you would know it was not words." "And what are you now?" Selene asked, softly. It was the realest question she had ever asked anyone. Damon was quiet a long moment. He did not reach for the speech of a man pleading his case. He reached instead for the one thing the cold and the labor had finally taught him. "For my whole life," he said, "I believed a strong man needs no one. That needing was the same as weakness, and weakness was the same as death. So I made certain I never needed a single soul, least of all you." He looked out at the fences he had mended, the wood he had stacked, the small, honest world he had raised with his own ruined hands. "Out here, with nothing to hide behind, I learned the opposite. A man who needs no one is not strong, Selene. He is only alone. I had it backward my entire life." He turned back to her. "I do not want power. I do not want a crown. I never want to stand at the head of anything again. I want to build things with these hands and be of use and stop pretending I am a sky that holds itself up. That is all. That is the whole of what I want now." It was the complete inversion of the man he had been. The Alpha King had truly died out here in the cold and the labor, and what stood in his place, washing dirt from his hands at a pump in the spring evening, was a man who had been shattered all the way down to nothing. And then, slowly, by his own choice, reforged into something humble and honest and whole. Selene looked at him for a long, long moment. The bond pulled between them, warm now, no longer the frantic, desperate pull of the tower, no longer a thing she had to fight with all her strength. It had changed, the way everything had changed. It had become something quieter, something that asked rather than demanded. She closed the last of the distance between them. She reached up, and her cool fingers found the line of his jaw, the rough stubble there, the way they had once found it by firelight a lifetime ago. And Damon closed his eyes and leaned into the touch like a man who had crossed a long desert, finally bending to water. And he made no move to take more than she offered. He simply received it, gratefully, as a gift, not a right. "A counsel is efficient," Selene murmured, her thumb tracing slowly along his jaw. "It is fair. It is everything the throne was not, and I would not trade it for anything." A pause. "But it can be very lonely at the head of a long open table. Even a good world can be a cold one to walk through alone." Damon's breath caught. He did not dare to hope. He had taught himself, out here, not to. "I do not need an Alpha King," Selene said. Her dark eyes opened into his, steady and certain. I do not need a protector. I spent enough of my life being protected straight out of my own power." She let that sit. "But I have learned the same thing you learned in my own cold tower, missing you and refusing to be saved by you in the same breath. That the strongest thing in the world is not standing alone. I do not need a king." Her thumb brushed the corner of his mouth. "But I might have room for an equal." Damon opened his eyes, and the flicker of disbelief in them, the dawning, overwhelming, terrified hope, was the most honest thing she had ever watched cross a man's face. "An equal," he repeated, like a word in a language he was only just learning to speak. "No secrets," Selene said, and now the iron came back into her voice, the iron that was simply part of her now. "No decisions made alone in the dark. No deciding what is best for me without me in the room. You earn your place beside me every single day for the rest of your life, not by right of blood, not by the size of your teeth, by right of respect, the kind you have to keep proving, because the moment you stop proving it, I will be gone, and this time you will know exactly why, and there will be no smile." Damon went to his knees in the soft spring grass, not in defeat this time, not the way he had knelt in the snow with a kingdom falling around him. He went down slowly, deliberately, in something that looked almost like devotion, and he took her hand and pressed it to his forehead, and his shoulders shook just once with the weight of everything it had cost them both to arrive here. "Every day," he said against her skin, "for the rest of my life, I am yours, Selene, not as your king, as your partner, as the man lucky enough to be allowed to stand beside the sun and learn, finally, how to be of use to it." And Selene Hart, who had not wept when he betrayed her, who had wept only once and alone in a high, cold tower over the version of him she thought was lost forever, felt something in her chest unclench that had been clenched for a very long time. She drew him up to his feet, and she let herself, at last, be held. Not saved, held. There was all the difference in the world between the two, and she had spent a lifetime learning to tell them apart. The seasons turned again, and the world they had built turned with them. The pack did not merely survive, it thrived in a way the old kingdom of fear and bloodlines never had. Trade flowed where tolls had once strangled it. The villages that had starved learned the strange new feeling of full stores and unlocked doors. Transparency, it turned out, was not weakness. It was the thing that made a people strong enough to stop being afraid of one another. Cora Vance became a force in her own right. No longer a pawn, no longer a hidden blade, no longer anyone's costume. She governed the southern reaches with a clear, hard fairness, and the powerless flocked to her because she had once been the most powerless of all, and she had never once forgotten the cold of it. She negotiated with distant packs across long tables, and grown men who had spent their lives underestimating soft-spoken women learned, one by one, the lesson her uncle had learned too late. Marin Frost and Wesley Cole, the two who had stood at the edges of the whole long story, found each other somewhere in the rebuilding, and were quietly mated by the time the second winter softened into spring. They laughed more than anyone expected of two such serious people. It suited them. And Damon built things. He was given charge of the work he had always, underneath all the posturing, actually been good at. Not ruling. Building. He raised schools in villages that had never had them. He built safe roads where the dark ones had been. roads that carried bread now instead of stolen lives, and he walked every one of them himself before he would call them finished. He answered to the council, he answered to her, and he never once in all the seasons that followed mistook the answering for a loss of anything. It was the night of the long solstice gala when the last ghost of the old story finally laid itself to rest. The great hall of the Capitol glittered with light and laughter, full of dignitaries from packs that had once been enemies and were now something closer to neighbors. Cora held a court near the center of the room, sharp and luminous, drawing a difficult treaty toward a close with nothing but her voice and her patience. Marin and Wesley laughed together by the fountains, and Damon stood out on the balcony, in a dark, simple suit, looking out over the lights of a city that no longer feared the hand that governed it. The doors slid open behind him, and her scent reached him first, the way it always did now, the way he hoped it always would. Selene stepped out into the cool night air. She wore a gown the deep blue of the sky just after the last light leaves it. No crown, no heavy archaic weight of office. She had buried all of that with the throne, and she had never missed it for a single day. Hiding from the ambassadors? She teased, slipping her arm through his. Just taking a moment. Damon smiled down at her, and the love in his eyes was nothing like the possessive, stifling thing it had once been. It was calm now, steady, the look of a man whose worth was no longer tied to a title, but to the patient daily work of being someone worth standing beside. For a while they simply stood there, watching the bright hall through the glass. Then Damon spoke again, quietly, the way a man speaks when he has carried a question a long time. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what would have happened if you had taken the cold answer that night, the night the girl was caught? If you had left her in that house and won clean?" Selene followed his gaze across the room to where Cora stood in a circle of light, free and formidable and entirely her own, closing a piece with nothing but the strength of her own voice. "I would have won," Selene said. "I would have had the throne and the gold and the proof, and not one thread out of place." A pause. "And I would have spent the rest of my life as the exact thing I burned a kingdom down to stop. A person who decided someone else was worth spending." She let her eyes rest on the girl across the hall. "There she is, instead, whole. That is what the harder answer bought me, Damon. Not a cleaner victory. Her. And I would pay it again 1,000 times." Damon was quiet a long moment, and when he looked at her, there was something close to reverence in it. "That," he said, "is the difference between us that I will spend my life trying to close. You never once forgot that the people were the point." Selene looked up at him, and her dark eyes shone in the lights from the hall. And then she smiled. It was not the cold smile, not the one that had haunted him from the first night by the candlelight, the one that had been a mirror held up to everything he was too proud to see. That smile was a ghost now, long laid to rest, its work finished and its lesson learned. This smile was warm, radiant, entirely his and entirely her own at the same time, the way the best things always are. "You are a good man, Damon Reed," she whispered. "Only because I had a ruthless and groundbreaking teacher," he said, "who burned down a false world rather than let me stay small inside it." He leaned down, and he kissed her slowly in the cool blue dark. And it was not a claim of ownership, the way his kisses had once been. It was a promise, renewed the way it was renewed every single ordinary day, to stand beside her, not in front of her, to carry the sky together, or not to carry it at all. The king had fallen, but the man had risen in his place, and that, in the end, had been worth far more than any crown. Because this was the thing the long cold winter had taught her, the thing she carried now into every full and open room she entered. That true strength had never once been found in suffering quietly, or in waiting for an apology that might never come, or in being patient and small and good while the world declined to see you. True strength was in claiming your own voice, in refusing to be spent, in knowing your worth so completely that you would burn down a false world rather than live small inside it, and then having the harder courage afterward to build a true one in its place, with your own two hands, beside the people who had finally learned how to stand as your equals. Some things have to be taken apart all the way down to nothing before they can be rebuilt into something that will hold. A throne, a man, sometimes even a love. And the woman everyone had once stopped watching, the quiet one bent over her ledgers in the lamplight, stood now at the head of a world remade in the image of that single stubborn truth. She had wanted, in the beginning, only to be seen. In the end, she had taught a whole people how to see.